don't know if this is the kind of video that people are looking up to find, but as a person who likes to listen to musicals and really likes musicals a lot, I was in some when I was younger, and I enjoy seeing them live at local community theaters, I have some suggestions on how people can get into musicals if they're interested. The first is to listen to cast recordings. Like, they're pretty easy to find on YouTube, or if you use other, I assume, I just listen to YouTube, like, free, just with the ads, but, like, I'm sure a lot are on other services for listening to music. But if you're new, you can just look up well-known musicals. But something I'd like to do is go through the years. You can find them on websites of, like, musicals, like Broadway musicals, that premiered each year from, like, you can look up the decade and see musicals, and a lot of them will have a cast recording which you can listen to. I've listened to some, like, obscure musicals that way, like obscure old musicals that I feel like that most people probably aren't listening to or have forgotten about, and of course newer musicals too, so that's a good way. You'll sometimes find hidden gems, or sometimes musicals that I guess are sort of well known, but I wasn't super familiar, and then you listen to the cast recording and you're like, oh, this is really good. And of course, if there's movie adaptations, you can listen to the soundtrack. A second way you can get into musicals is by watching pro shots. I know there's a streaming service for pro shots of musicals, and I know certain streaming services have different musicals, so that way you can see professionally performed live versions. I haven't gotten as into those. Even with musicals I like, sometimes I don't know if it's just like, this isn't something I've done personally as much, but it's something that exists and I know is out there. A third way is to watch movie adaptations of musicals. I'm more focused on stage musicals, like Broadway musicals, off-Broadway musicals. Now, sometimes these can be a bit different than the stage musical that they're based on. Often they cut out songs, which I don't always like, or they're in different orders, but there are some very good movie adaptations of stage musicals that are very, like, faithful to the original, or they make changes that actually make it better than the original, or at least as good. But in at least a decent amount of cases, you'll at least get a good idea of the stage musical by watching the movie. There's some that are, like, very different, but for the most part, they'll at least be, like, mostly the same, though, I don't know, not always as good, though a few cases better, if that makes sense. And then some cases equally as good, but in a different kind of way. So yeah, so it's something to keep in mind when you're watching a movie adaptation, like, especially recent movie adaptations. Like, I usually feel with a lot of those, the stage musical's better. Like, with older movie adaptations, sometimes I think the movie adaptation is as good or better. But for the most part, when it comes to recent movie adaptations of musicals, I feel like the stage musical is just better. And the fourth way you can get into musicals, which it might cost a little more money, so it's putting that out there, is to see local community theater productions. Or, I mean, you can also see professional, like touring or other sorts, but something that's a bit more reasonable price and easier. And I've seen some really good productions, so I don't know necessarily what area you live in, and I mean, I live in the US, so I feel like there's more options than maybe some other countries, but if you live in the US, at least, there might be some really good community theater near you. Don't just think that, oh, because they're not professional actors or it's not Broadway or touring, it's not really good. No, I've seen some, like, really, really good productions that are just, like, ones that just, like, stay with you. And it's, like, where the cast was just, like, so right, where it's, like, the casting is just, like, so right on, and just, like, the experience of seeing it, and maybe the individual community theater, like, the sort of show, like, the sort of theater facility, the show works really well in it, and it's just, like, and then sometimes you see a musical where it's like, it's exactly what you needed at that point in your life. Like, sometimes you go into the musical where it's like, oh, I love this musical so much, I know it's exactly what I need. But other times you take a chance on a musical where you're like, oh, I've heard that's good, or you're like, you just want to see something. And then it's like somehow, it's like exactly what you needed at that point in your life. Either there's just something about the story, or like a song in particular that, like, helps you work through stuff. So I definitely have that experience where it's like, yeah, and it's definitely just, like, a fun social event where you can just, like, there's sort of a camaraderie of seeing a show live. Even if you don't know the people in the audience around you, you just kind of feel like, and I'm not, like, a super extroverted person, but I guess I'm a little more introverted, but not extremely. But even I kind of like it where you just, like, feel like you're part of something, and it's just, like, people are usually happy to be there. either they know people or they like the show or they just are patrons of the theater. So it's just usually like a positive experience where you just like feel good afterwards. You feel good about seeing the show, hopefully. You feel good about seeing the show, and then you maybe have interesting stories from like things you overheard from people talking in the audience or during intermission, or sometimes there are other stories of something else that happened that you're just like, wow, okay, that's really something. So yeah. So those are my suggestions for if someone who isn't really into musicals but is interested in getting into musicals. Well, those are 4 suggestions for either watching or listening to musicals or finding out about musicals. What's your favorite musical? Leave it below in the comments. I feel like I should quote something from a musical, but I don't know what.